It began with a meeting no court circular ever mentioned. Behind the sealed doors of Kensington Palace, Prince William reportedly confronted a truth the monarchy had buried for years. A truth tied not just to Meghan Markle, but to the future of the crown itself. Staff were silenced. Security patterns shifted overnight. And when Meghan allegedly learned William was finally prepared to speak, insiders claim panic spread through Montecito faster than the palace could contain it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. According to whispers emerging from inside palace administrative circles, the meeting itself was unlike anything senior aides had witnessed in years. This was not a ceremonial briefing. It was not another exhausting discussion about press strategy, public image, or damage control. Reports suggest Prince William entered the room carrying what one insider allegedly described as a final line in the sand. Present inside were senior legal advisors, longtime institutional strategists, and figures connected to the royal archives. People rarely assembled together unless the stakes involved the future protection of the monarchy itself. And what reportedly unfolded during those closed-door discussions sent an unmistakable signal through Kensington Palace corridors. The era of silence was ending. For months, royal correspondents had quietly hinted that something had shifted behind the scenes. William, once described by insiders as emotionally wounded by years of public conflict, allegedly became colder, more calculated, and increasingly focused on long-term institutional survival rather than personal reconciliation. Different interpretations of the meeting describe stacks of historic internal records resurfacing from protected royal archives, including correspondence tied to some of the most explosive years of the Sussex crisis. Reports suggest legal staff were instructed to revisit internal timelines, archived communications, and confidential palace memoranda connected to the period surrounding Meghan and Harry's departure from royal duties. What began as an internal review allegedly evolved into something much larger, a quiet re-examination of how the monarchy itself had handled one of the greatest public crises of the modern royal era. Then came the secrecy. Palace aides reportedly signed updated confidentiality agreements almost overnight. Communication channels tightened. Internal briefings became compartmentalized. Even longtime staff members allegedly found themselves excluded from conversations they would normally be involved in. Sources familiar with royal operations claimed the atmosphere inside Kensington Palace became unusually tense, with senior officials avoiding even informal discussions in shared offices and private corridors. One royal insider allegedly remarked that it felt less like routine palace management and more like preparations for an institutional storm. And through all of it, Prince William reportedly remained eerily calm. That detail appears again and again in whispers circulating among royal correspondents. Calm, but decisive. Silent, but absolutely certain. Insiders claim that after years of watching public narratives spiral beyond palace control, William had finally concluded that the monarchy could no longer survive through passive restraint alone. According to reports, he no longer viewed the conflict as merely a personal family fracture involving Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The issue had allegedly transformed into something much more dangerous, a battle over history itself. A battle over who would ultimately define the truth surrounding the final years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, King Charles III's weakened monarchy, and the future authority of the crown. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in California, reports suggest unofficial media contacts connected to Montecito began hearing whispers of the palace activity almost immediately. Insiders claim Meghan Markle was informed that William had personally approved discussions surrounding what some royal commentators now describe as a major correction of the narrative. And according to multiple interpretations emerging from royal media circles, that realization allegedly triggered deep concern within the Sussex camp. Because for years, the monarchy had absorbed blows in silence. But now, whispers suggested the future king might finally be preparing to reveal what the institution had protected for far too long. Even Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly played a far more important role behind the scenes than many realized. Sources close to palace operations claim she quietly supported William's decision to take a firmer institutional stance. particularly as pressure surrounding the monarchy intensified during King Charles's ongoing health struggles. While Catherine allegedly avoided direct involvement publicly, insiders whisper that her private support strengthened William's resolve during some of the most emotionally exhausting months the family had faced in years. And according to those familiar with the shifting dynamics inside Kensington Palace, the unity between William and Catherine reportedly became one of the defining stabilizing forces behind the future king's increasingly decisive actions. But the documents at the center of the storm weren't new at all. They had allegedly been hidden in plain sight for years, waiting for the exact moment the future king decided to act. For years, the public war between the palace and the Sussexes seemed locked in stalemate. But according to insiders, William had quietly stopped fighting in public because he was preparing something far more dangerous. Proof. And once senior aides allegedly reopened confidential communication logs from the final years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, the carefully protected royal narrative reportedly began to fracture from the inside. The deeper palace officials allegedly dug into archived records, the more uncomfortable the situation reportedly became. What many once dismissed as isolated tensions or exaggerated tabloid speculation suddenly appeared connected through a much larger pattern, one that insiders claim had been quietly buried beneath years of carefully managed public statements and diplomatic silence. According to whispers circulating through royal administrative circles, confidential correspondence tied to Kensington Palace operations began resurfacing during William's internal review, including old staff complaints, disputed timelines, and private memoranda linked to the increasingly volatile period surrounding Meghan and Harry's departure from royal life. Reports suggest some of these files had not been revisited in years, largely because senior palace figures feared reopening wounds that never truly healed. But the atmosphere reportedly changed the moment William personally became involved. Royal insiders claim the future king grew increasingly frustrated with what he allegedly viewed as half-truths dominating history. For years, the public conversation surrounding the Sussex crisis had been shaped by interviews, documentaries, media appearances, and competing narratives, each side presenting its own version of emotional betrayal and institutional failure. Yet according to those close to Kensington Palace, William reportedly believed the monarchy's silence had allowed critical details to disappear beneath the noise. What disturbed him most, insiders whisper, was not merely the criticism directed at the royal family, but the growing perception that history itself was being rewritten while the institution remained frozen in defensive restraint. As archived communication logs resurfaced, reports suggest old tensions surrounding departures from Kensington Palace were suddenly revisited with renewed urgency. Different interpretations of those years allegedly revealed a far more emotionally chaotic environment behind closed doors than the public ever realized. Palace aides reportedly struggled under enormous internal pressure as divisions deepened between competing households, media teams, and senior advisors attempting to contain escalating conflict. Some insiders claim staff members once feared further leaks emerging not only from external sources, but from within royal circles themselves. Trust reportedly deteriorated to such an extent that even routine discussions became politically sensitive, with aides allegedly terrified that private conversations could eventually become international headlines. And looming over all of it was the declining health and emotional exhaustion of Queen Elizabeth II during her final years. According to palace whispers, the late monarch became increasingly burdened by the ongoing family fracture as tensions intensified between the institution and the Sussexes. Reports suggest private meetings surrounding Harry and Meghan's future often carried a heavy emotional weight inside Balmoral, Windsor, and Sandringham, particularly as the Queen's health weakened behind closed doors. While the public still saw moments of royal unity during ceremonies and appearances, insiders claim the reality within the family was far more painful. The monarchy was not simply facing a public relations crisis. It was enduring an internal rupture during one of the most fragile periods in modern royal history. At the same time, Meghan Markle's media strategy allegedly appeared very differently inside palace operations than it did publicly. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, some senior aides believed the Sussexes had successfully positioned themselves as isolated victims, while palace officials remained unable or unwilling to publicly challenge disputed claims. Different interpretations of the situation continue to circulate, but insiders claim William increasingly viewed the issue through an institutional lens rather than a personal one. This was no longer about anger between brothers. It was about protecting the long-term credibility of the crown before irreversible damage was done. That shift reportedly transformed William completely. The emotional reactions that once defined the early years of the conflict allegedly gave way to something colder, quieter, and far more strategic. Royal commentators began noticing that William rarely responded publicly anymore, even when tensions exploded across international headlines. But according to insiders, silence did not mean surrender. It meant preparation. Because behind closed palace doors, the future king was allegedly assembling a detailed understanding of everything that had happened during the monarchy's most destabilizing modern crisis, and preparing for the moment he might finally act. And as whispers spread through royal households from Balmoral to Windsor, attention suddenly turned toward one explosive question. What exactly had William discovered that made even veteran courtiers nervous? Deep inside the royal archives, beyond ceremonial letters and state papers, insiders whisper there existed another category entirely: documents never intended for public eyes. Reports now suggest Prince William personally reviewed a collection tied to the Sussex era, and what he allegedly found transformed a private family fracture into something far larger. A battle over truth, loyalty, and the survival of royal authority itself. According to Palace Whispers, the atmosphere surrounding the royal archives reportedly shifted the moment confidential retrieval requests began moving through internal channels. These were not routine historical reviews tied to anniversaries, speeches, or constitutional matters. Sources familiar with royal operations claim senior archivists were quietly instructed to revisit sealed briefing notes, internal memoranda, and private communications connected to the years surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's departure from royal duties. And almost immediately, insiders suggest unease spread among longtime staff members who feared the resurfacing material could expose how deeply fractured the institution had truly become behind closed doors. What reportedly disturbed William most were the alleged contradictions buried within those internal records. According to various interpretations emerging from royal media circles, archived palace timelines did not always align with later public narratives that dominated global headlines. Some briefing notes allegedly described escalating tensions inside Kensington Palace, long before certain public claims emerged. Other records reportedly referenced emergency discussions between communications teams struggling to contain leaks, staff resignations, and emotional confrontations that were never publicly acknowledged. None of it, insiders claim, painted a simple picture of heroes and villains. Instead, the documents allegedly revealed an exhausted institution trapped in a slow-moving internal collapse while trying desperately to preserve the image of royal stability. Reports suggest certain palace aides became deeply concerned about the reputational damage these records could cause if they ever surfaced publicly. For years, the monarchy survived through controlled silence, carefully avoiding direct public warfare even as accusations intensified across interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and media campaigns. But according to insiders, the reopening of these archives threatened something far more dangerous than temporary embarrassment. It threatened the credibility of the institution itself. Because once confidential timelines began overlapping with public narratives, uncomfortable questions allegedly emerged about what had truly happened during some of the monarchy's darkest modern moments. And at the center of William's reported fury was the memory of Queen Elizabeth II during the final years of her life. Sources close to royal operations claim the future king became increasingly disturbed by how the late monarch's final chapter had been publicly framed amid the chaos surrounding the Sussex conflict. According to Palace Whispers, internal records allegedly revealed just how emotionally draining the situation became for the Queen behind closed doors as family divisions deepened while her health steadily declined. Senior staff reportedly watched an aging monarch forced to navigate relentless emotional pressure during a period already defined by grief, constitutional responsibility, and physical exhaustion. For William, insiders claim, this was no longer simply about correcting public misunderstandings. It became about defending the dignity of the woman who had spent 70 years protecting the crown. At the same time, reports suggest senior aides quietly began discussing what some insiders allegedly described as institutional stabilization. Behind closed palace doors, conversations reportedly shifted away from short-term media management and toward long-term survival planning for the monarchy itself. The concern, according to those familiar with internal discussions, was no longer whether tensions with the Sussexes could be repaired. It was whether the institution could continue functioning effectively while competing versions of royal history continued spreading unchecked across the world. References to confidential Sandringham negotiations reportedly resurfaced during these discussions as well. Insiders claim private meetings surrounding Harry and Meghan's departure were far more emotionally charged than the public ever understood, with legal advisors, senior family members, and communications officials struggling to contain a crisis that appeared to evolve faster than anyone could control. Different interpretations of those meetings continue to circulate, but reports suggest William allegedly left some of those discussions convinced that the monarchy had underestimated how dangerous the conflict could eventually become. Then came another alarming development. Media insiders reportedly began hearing whispers that several major publishers had suddenly shown interest in royal archive material connected to the Sussex years. That alone sent fresh anxiety through palace circles. Because according to sources familiar with royal strategy, the institution's greatest fear was never a single interview or documentary. It was the possibility that competing records, private correspondence, and hidden timelines could one day explode into public view, all at once. But the deeper William reportedly looked into the past, the more the crisis stopped being about interviews or documentaries and became about the monarchy's future under his reign. According to palace whispers, Meghan Markle once believed time would weaken William's resolve. Instead, insiders now claim the opposite happened. The future king reportedly became colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous politically. And when reports emerged that William had privately approved a long-term strategy to rebuild institutional credibility, sources claim panic quietly spread across the Sussex camp. For years, many observers believed the conflict inside the House of Windsor would eventually burn itself out through exhaustion alone. The interviews would fade. The documentaries would lose momentum. Public attention would move elsewhere. And perhaps, somewhere in the distance, reconciliation might quietly emerge through silence and time. But according to insiders close to Kensington Palace, Prince William allegedly reached the exact opposite conclusion. Reports suggest he became convinced that every year of institutional hesitation allowed deeper damage to settle into public memory. And rather than reacting emotionally any longer, the future king reportedly began preparing for something far more calculated: a complete restructuring of how the monarchy would defend itself in the modern era. Royal aides allegedly noticed the transformation slowly at first. The anger that once surfaced behind closed doors reportedly disappeared almost entirely. Public frustration gave way to emotional restraint. Meetings became shorter, more focused, more strategic. According to sources familiar with palace operations, William stopped viewing the Sussex conflict as a temporary family crisis and instead began approaching it like a long-term institutional threat that required patience, discipline, and absolute control. One insider allegedly described the shift bluntly. He stopped thinking like a brother and started thinking like a future king. That change reportedly unsettled many people inside royal circles far more than public arguments ever did. Because while emotional reactions can fade, cold strategy rarely does. Insiders claim William became increasingly disciplined in how he handled internal matters, refusing impulsive responses even when fresh allegations or media attacks emerged publicly. Palace aides reportedly described him as focused, methodical, and at times emotionally distant, particularly as conversations surrounding the monarchy's future intensified during King Charles III's ongoing health struggles. According to various interpretations circulating among royal commentators, William allegedly concluded that preserving institutional credibility mattered more than repairing personal relationships that had already shattered beyond recognition. At the same time, reports suggest palace officials quietly began preparing for a future reign era restructuring behind closed doors. The discussions reportedly involved communication systems, internal loyalty structures, and broader plans designed to strengthen the monarchy against future destabilization. Insiders whisper that some senior aides feared the institution had become too reactive during the Sussex years, constantly responding to external narratives while slowly losing control of its own voice. And according to sources familiar with these private conversations, William reportedly intended to change that permanently once his reign eventually began. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle allegedly became increasingly concerned about losing influence over the public royal narrative she and Harry had spent years shaping. Reports suggest unofficial media contacts linked to California circles began hearing whispers about William's long-term plans well before anything reached the public. According to insiders, what alarmed the Sussex camp most was not the possibility of direct retaliation, but the growing realization that the monarchy might no longer be fighting emotionally at all. Instead, it was allegedly repositioning itself strategically for the decades ahead. And somewhere in the middle of this widening divide stood Prince Harry himself. Different interpretations of his role continue to emerge from both royal insiders and media figures, but reports increasingly describe him as emotionally exhausted by the never-ending conflict surrounding both sides of his life. Some insiders claim Harry remained deeply loyal to Meghan and protective of the choices they made after leaving royal duties. Others whisper that the ongoing institutional coldness from within the palace created emotional fractures that became impossible to ignore privately. But regardless of where the truth ultimately rests, one thing reportedly became clear to those inside royal circles: the distance between Harry and William had evolved far beyond ordinary family tension. Throughout all of it, Catherine reportedly maintained a very different approach behind palace walls. According to insiders close to Kensington Palace, the Princess of Wales quietly encouraged what some aides allegedly called a no public war, only controlled action strategy. Rather than escalating emotionally through headlines or public retaliation, Catherine reportedly believed stability, patience, and discipline would ultimately strengthen William's future position far more effectively than visible confrontation ever could. Sources suggest her calm influence became one of the few stabilizing forces inside an institution increasingly consumed by stress, uncertainty, and emotional fatigue. But perhaps the most chilling realization spreading through royal households was this: a growing number of insiders allegedly no longer believed reconciliation was realistically possible at all. The emotional damage had gone too deep. The competing narratives had hardened too completely. And according to whispers from within palace circles, preparations were no longer being built around reunion, they were being built around survival. And then came the move that reportedly changed everything: a silent palace operation designed not for headlines, but for permanent institutional control. There were no dramatic press conferences, no furious palace statements, no public retaliation. Instead, insiders claim Prince William launched something far more effective: a silent counteroffensive inside the machinery of the monarchy itself. And according to reports circulating through royal circles, the message behind it was devastatingly clear: the era of uncertainty was ending, and the future king intended to reclaim control permanently. According to sources familiar with internal palace operations, the shift did not begin publicly at all. There were no visible declarations, no televised moments, no emotional appeals for sympathy. What emerged instead was something colder, more disciplined, and infinitely more strategic. Insiders whisper that William allegedly concluded the monarchy's greatest weakness during the Sussex years had been fragmentation. Too many competing households, too many unofficial briefings, too many people reacting emotionally while public trust slowly eroded. And so, rather than fighting another public battle, the future king reportedly turned inward, focusing on the institution itself like a commander rebuilding a fortress after years of siege. Reports suggest quiet restructuring discussions tied to William's eventual reign began intensifying behind closed palace walls. Senior advisors allegedly reviewed communication protocols, staffing structures, and internal reporting systems with increasing urgency. According to various interpretations circulating through royal circles, the goal was not revenge against Meghan Markle or Prince Harry. It was stability. Long-term stability. Palace insiders claim William became convinced that unless the monarchy strengthened its internal discipline, future crises could become even more destructive than the Sussex fallout already had been. One of the most talked about developments involved reports of stricter loyalty expectations inside royal staffing networks. According to whispers emerging from Kensington Palace and Clarence House circles, internal communication systems allegedly became far more controlled as fears surrounding leaks and narrative manipulation continued growing. Senior aides were reportedly expected to operate with greater institutional alignment, while informal briefing cultures that once flourished behind the scenes allegedly faced quiet restrictions. Some insiders described the atmosphere as tense but focused. Others allegedly viewed it as the beginning of an entirely new royal operating philosophy, one built around containment, consistency, and centralized authority. At the same time, reports suggest senior royal households quietly began consolidating communications influence in preparation for the monarchy's next chapter. According to palace commentators, William increasingly viewed public messaging not as a media issue, but as a matter of institutional survival. The years of competing narratives, emotional interviews, leaked grievances, and contradictory claims had reportedly convinced him that the crown could no longer afford fragmented responses during moments of crisis. And according to insiders, that realization became one of the driving forces behind what some aides privately described as a future-proofing strategy for the monarchy itself. Then came whispers surrounding what certain royal commentators allegedly began calling the heirs' accord. Different interpretations of the phrase continue circulating, but insiders claim it referred to a growing alignment between William and senior royals who prioritized continuity above personal drama. Figures connected to Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and long-standing palace advisors reportedly began moving increasingly in sync behind closed doors, forming what some observers described as an informal protective alliance around the institution's future. Reports suggest the objective was simple, but ruthless: preserve the crown first, stabilize the monarchy second, and allow emotional reconciliation only if it no longer threatened the institution itself. Meanwhile, King Charles III reportedly appeared increasingly exhausted by the years of non-stop family conflict. Sources close to royal operations claim the emotional burden surrounding the Sussex crisis weighed heavily on the king during an already fragile period, defined by illness, constitutional pressure, and public scrutiny. Insiders whisper that Charles often found himself trapped between competing instincts, his role as monarch demanding institutional stability, while his role as father continued pulling him toward emotional reconciliation. But according to palace commentators, William's approach allegedly became far less conflicted over time. Where Charles still hoped for healing, the future king reportedly became focused on durability. And that transformation dramatically altered how royal insiders began viewing him. Reports increasingly framed William not as an angry brother reacting emotionally to betrayal, but as a future monarch positioning himself as the defender of continuity, order, and institutional resilience. Royal commentators described it as a major shift in institutional gravity. The center of long-term royal authority, they claimed, was slowly moving away from emotional management and toward strategic consolidation under William's future reign. But while the palace tightened its structure behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly faced a growing realization that the real battle was no longer happening in interviews, it was happening inside history itself. At its core, insiders claim this was never just a feud between brothers. It became a war over memory, over legacy, over who would ultimately define the final years of Queen Elizabeth II, the weakened reign of King Charles III, and the future identity of the House of Windsor itself. And according to those close to palace operations, William allegedly decided he could no longer remain silent, while others shaped that history for him. By the time the conflict reached this stage, insiders claimed the emotional damage inside the royal family had already gone far beyond repair. The public still saw headlines, interviews, statements, and carefully controlled appearances, but according to whispers from within palace circles, the true battle was happening somewhere far deeper and far more painful. It was happening inside memory itself. Because every new documentary, every televised interview, every fresh accusation reportedly reopened old wounds tied to the final years of Queen Elizabeth II's life. a period many inside the institution allegedly remember not with triumph, but with exhaustion, grief, and unbearable emotional strain. Sources close to Kensington Palace claim William became increasingly haunted by the late Queen's declining final years, as archived records and private recollections resurfaced behind closed doors. Reports suggest he privately struggled with the idea that the woman who dedicated more than 70 years to preserving the crown spent some of her final chapter trapped in escalating family turmoil, while the institution around her fought to contain public collapse. According to insiders, that realization changed him permanently. The issue was no longer whether disagreements existed within the family. Every family has conflict. What disturbed William, sources claim, was the growing fear that history itself might eventually remember those final years through only one perspective, while the monarchy remained silent in response. And within palace operations, one phrase allegedly began appearing repeatedly during private discussions: institutional betrayal. Different interpretations of that phrase continue to circulate among royal commentators, but insiders suggest it reflected a widening fear that confidential family tensions had evolved into something capable of damaging the long-term authority of the crown itself. Reports claim senior aides increasingly worried that repeated public disclosures surrounding private royal conversations were weakening trust not only within the family, but within the institution's internal structure. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, scandals, and constitutional crises before. But according to palace veterans, this felt different, because the conflict was unfolding in real time across global media, while competing narratives hardened permanently in public memory. At the same time, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's media appearances reportedly intensified internal anxiety with every passing year. Sources familiar with palace sentiment claim each interview or public statement reignited private discussions surrounding loyalty, reputation, and historical legacy. According to insiders, many officials feared the monarchy was slowly losing control over how one of the most emotionally fragile periods in modern royal history would eventually be remembered by future generations. And because of that, William allegedly became increasingly determined to reclaim that narrative before it settled permanently beyond correction. Throughout all of it, Catherine reportedly remained one of the only consistent emotional stabilizers inside the family. Palace insiders claim the Princess of Wales quietly helped maintain calm during moments when tensions behind closed doors became almost unbearable. While William allegedly grew colder and more strategically focused over time, Catherine reportedly continued encouraging discipline without emotional escalation. Sources suggest her role became especially important as pressure surrounding King Charles III intensified during his health struggles, with the monarchy simultaneously facing institutional uncertainty and deepening family fracture. According to those close to palace operations, Catherine understood something many others did not. The monarchy could survive criticism, but it could not survive chaos. Meanwhile, King Charles himself reportedly became increasingly isolated between both sides of the conflict. Insiders whisper that the king remained emotionally torn between his role as sovereign and his role as father, particularly as divisions between William and Harry hardened beyond repair. Reports suggest Charles often appeared emotionally exhausted behind closed doors, struggling to hold together a family that seemed to drift further apart with every passing public controversy. And according to palace commentators, that isolation only deepened as discussions surrounding the future reign quietly accelerated around him. At the same time, royal historians and institutional advisors allegedly began preparing for what some insiders described as future narrative battles. Because by now, the stakes had expanded beyond temporary headlines or damaged relationships. Public perception itself had reportedly become directly tied to William's future authority as king. If competing versions of the monarchy's recent history solidified permanently, insiders feared it could shape how the public viewed the future sovereign for decades to come. And just as tensions appeared ready to explode publicly once again, insiders claim the palace delivered one final signal that the balance of power had officially changed. Then came the moment insiders describe as the true turning point. Not a speech, not a leaked interview, but a quiet palace decision so deliberate that veteran royal staff reportedly understood its meaning instantly. According to whispers from within royal administrative circles, the monarchy had finally stopped reacting to Meghan Markle and started planning for a future entirely without her influence. By this stage, according to sources close to royal operations, something fundamental had shifted behind palace walls. For years, the institution had reportedly operated in a constant state of emotional reaction, responding to interviews, media campaigns, public accusations, and the endless cycle of international speculation surrounding the Sussexes. But insiders now claim the palace quietly reached a breaking point. Not publicly, not dramatically, simply strategically. And once that internal decision was made, reports suggest the monarchy began reorganizing itself around an entirely different assumption: that the future stability of the crown would depend not on reconciliation, but on separation. According to whispers circulating through Kensington Palace and Clarence House, Sussex influence inside royal operations allegedly faded almost completely during this period. The shift reportedly did not happen through open confrontation or visible punishment. Instead, insiders describe something colder and far more decisive: a gradual institutional withdrawal. Conversations that once revolved around potential repair reportedly disappeared. Strategic planning increasingly focused on future continuity without expecting Harry and Meghan to return in any meaningful operational role. And according to palace commentators, veteran staff members immediately recognized the significance of that transition. The monarchy was no longer waiting for the crisis to heal itself. At the same time, reports suggest palace communication systems underwent a quiet redesign tied directly to William's future reign. According to insiders, senior advisors allegedly began prioritizing long-term consistency over short-term emotional response, shaping messaging around stability, restraint, and institutional endurance. The years of chaotic public warfare had reportedly convinced many within the royal structure that uncontrolled narratives posed a greater danger than temporary criticism itself. And so the future king's strategy allegedly became brutally simple: reduce emotional noise, tighten institutional discipline, and slowly reposition the monarchy as something calmer, steadier, and impossible to destabilize publicly. Senior staff were reportedly instructed to focus relentlessly on what insiders described as continuity and stability. That phrase allegedly became one of the defining themes inside palace discussions as preparations surrounding William's eventual reign accelerated behind closed doors. According to sources familiar with royal planning, aides increasingly viewed public perception not as a popularity contest, but as a long-term battle over trust. Every internal adjustment, every communication shift, every staffing discussion reportedly carried the same underlying objective: to restore confidence in the monarchy's ability to survive modern crises without collapsing into emotional disorder. Meanwhile, reports suggest Meghan Markle became increasingly frustrated by shifting public momentum as the palace's strategy evolved. According to insiders, earlier years of emotional confrontation had often generated intense global attention and sympathy. But as William allegedly withdrew from public conflict and focused instead on institutional consolidation, the dynamic reportedly began changing. Palace commentators claim Meghan and Harry suddenly faced a far more difficult challenge: fighting an institution that no longer appeared emotionally reactive at all. And according to whispers from royal media circles, that silence became politically powerful in ways few initially expected. At the same time, Prince Harry reportedly found himself increasingly isolated from former royal networks that once shaped his entire world. Different interpretations continue to surround his relationship with the palace, but insiders claim emotional distance between Harry and senior members of the family deepened dramatically as time passed. Reports suggest many long-standing royal relationships became strained or faded entirely beneath the weight of years of public conflict. And while Harry allegedly remained committed to the life he built outside the monarchy, sources whisper that the emotional cost of permanent separation became harder to ignore privately. As for William, insiders now describe him as emotionally hardened but institutionally focused beyond anything palace staff had witnessed before. According to reports, The future king no longer viewed the crisis through the lens of personal betrayal alone. Instead, he allegedly saw himself carrying responsibility for protecting the monarchy through one of the most unstable transitional periods in generations. The emotional brother had slowly disappeared. In his place stood a future sovereign increasingly defined by discipline, caution, and long-term calculation. And perhaps most telling of all, royal insiders began quietly saying something that would have once sounded unthinkable inside the House of Windsor. The old era officially ended. According to palace whispers, the emotional uncertainty that dominated the Sussex years had finally given way to something colder, more structured, and far more permanent. The monarchy was adapting to survive, without relying on emotional reconciliation ever arriving. But the final chapter of the crisis wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about the monarchy redefining itself for the next generation. In the end, insiders whisper the hidden truth Prince William allegedly revealed was not a single explosive secret, but something far more unsettling. That behind the interviews, documentaries, accusations, and headlines, the monarchy had been fighting a silent war for survival all along. And according to palace veterans, the future king finally decided the institution could no longer afford silence if it wanted to survive the decades ahead. By the time the crisis reached its final stage, the atmosphere surrounding the House of Windsor had reportedly transformed completely. What once appeared to the public as a family feud filled with emotional interviews and media warfare had allegedly evolved into something much deeper behind palace walls. A brutal struggle over identity, authority, and the future survival of the monarchy itself. According to insiders, Prince William ultimately came to believe that silence, once viewed as the crown's greatest shield, had slowly become one of its greatest vulnerabilities. Every unanswered accusation, every disputed narrative, every carefully restrained response reportedly allowed a larger question to grow in the public mind. Who truly controlled the story of modern royal history? And according to palace whispers, that realization changed William forever. Reports suggest the future king gradually embraced a far more direct leadership philosophy than many senior royals expected. Not reckless, not emotional, but firmer, colder, and increasingly unwilling to allow the institution's future to drift through uncertainty. Sources familiar with internal palace operations claim William allegedly concluded that the monarchy's survival in the modern world would require something previous generations avoided whenever possible: strategic confrontation with competing narratives before they permanently reshaped public memory. At the center of this transformation was a growing belief among royal insiders that the conflict had become a battle between duty and personal narrative. According to commentators connected to palace circles, the monarchy increasingly viewed itself as defending continuity, constitutional stability, and institutional responsibility, while Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were perceived as fighting for personal truth, emotional recognition, and public vindication. And somewhere between those two realities, the emotional fracture widened until reconciliation reportedly became almost impossible to imagine. Meanwhile, Meghan's public image battle allegedly collided more aggressively with institutional resistance as the palace adapted its long-term strategy. Reports suggest the Sussexes once benefited from the monarchy's refusal to engage publicly in prolonged confrontation. But as William allegedly shifted toward controlled institutional positioning rather than passive silence, insiders claim the dynamic changed dramatically. The palace no longer appeared emotionally wounded. It appeared patient, organized, prepared for endurance. And according to royal commentators, that shift may have altered the balance of public perception more than any single interview or documentary ever could. At the same time, King Charles III's reign increasingly came to symbolize a difficult transitional chapter within modern royal history. Sources close to palace operations describe his reign as emotionally burdened almost from the beginning, defined by illness, public pressure, constitutional responsibility, and a family fracture that refused to heal. According to insiders, Charles often appeared caught between two worlds, one shaped by traditional royal restraint, the other shaped by an aggressive modern media era where silence itself could be weaponized. And while the king reportedly continued hoping for emotional peace inside the family, The institution around him allegedly began preparing for a future built more around structural stability than personal reconciliation. Through all of it, Catherine and William gradually emerged as the monarchy's central symbols of continuity. Palace insiders claim their image inside royal operations evolved far beyond simple popularity or public approval. Instead, they increasingly represented predictability during chaos, discipline during emotional upheaval, and stability during one of the most volatile periods the monarchy had faced in decades. According to various interpretations circulating through royal circles, the institution slowly repositioned itself around them, not because they were flawless, but because they appeared capable of enduring pressure, without publicly unraveling beneath it. And perhaps that became the monarchy's most important adaptation of all. Contrary to endless predictions of collapse, insiders now claim the institution never truly viewed itself as dying. It viewed itself as changing. Painfully, slowly, sometimes coldly, but changing nonetheless. The old model of royal silence had reportedly fractured under modern pressure, forcing the monarchy to evolve into something more strategically aware, more protective of its own narrative, and far more conscious of how history itself is shaped in real time. Because in the end, this was never simply about Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, Prince William, or even King Charles III alone. According to palace veterans, it became a struggle over who would ultimately define an era that may one day be remembered as one of the most dangerous turning points in modern royal history. A battle over memory, over sacrifice, over the painful cost of preserving an institution built on continuity while the world around it changed faster than tradition could contain. Because within the House of Windsor, insiders say one lesson now echoes louder than ever: reputations may dominate headlines for a season, but legacy decides who ultimately survives history. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.